After the assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE, the Roman Republic fractured. The resulting power vacuum was temporarily filled by an emergency alliance between two of Caesar's loyalists, his adopted son Octavian and his top general Mark Antony. Together, they hunted down Caesar's assassins and then divided the known world. Octavian took control of the West, and Antony took the wealthier, more populous East. Antony's eastern command brought him directly into the orbit of Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt. We can see how publicly entwined their political and personal lives became when we look at this ancient silver coin. On one side, we have Mark Antony, the Roman general. On the flip side, Cleopatra. They effectively merged Roman military might with Egyptian royal wealth. By the late 30s BCE, Antony had fathered 3 children with Cleopatra and essentially abandoned his Roman wife, who happened to be Octavian's sister. He then held a highly public ceremony in Alexandria, where he began giving away Roman provinces to his Egyptian children. Most dangerously, he formally recognized Cleopatra's eldest son, Caesarion, as the true biological heir to Julius Caesar. Octavian's entire political legitimacy rested on the fact that he was Caesar's adopted son. By elevating a biological heir, Antony directly threatened Octavian's right to rule. The division of the map was no longer sustainable. A violent clash to decide who would control the Mediterranean was now inevitable. Before mobilizing any troops, Octavian launched a ruthless political strike. He marched into the Temple of the Vestal Virgins in Rome and forcibly seized Mark Antony's private will, an act that was highly illegal and deeply shocking to Roman society. Whether the document was entirely genuine or doctored by Octavian, the text contained an explosive demand. Antony requested that upon his death, he should be buried not in Rome, but in Alexandria, right alongside Cleopatra. Octavian read this document aloud to the Roman Senate. To the public ear, this proved Antony had abandoned his homeland and become the puppet of an Eastern monarch. Octavian carefully engineered the ensuing declaration of war to target Cleopatra and Egypt, entirely avoiding the mention of Mark Antony. By focusing the outrage entirely on a foreign queen, Octavian solved his biggest logistical problem. The Roman public was exhausted by decades of civil wars, but through masterfully manipulated optics, Octavian rallied the entire state apparatus for what they believed was a patriotic defense of Rome. In the winter of 32 BCE, Antony moved his forces into western Greece, intending to use it as a staging ground to invade Italy. If you look at this sweeping landscape of the Ambracian Gulf, you are seeing the exact choke point where Antony anchored his armada. It was an intimidating force of roughly 500 massive, towering warships known as polyremes, but the imposing numbers masked a rotting foundation. Trapped in the marshy lowlands surrounding the Gulf, Antony's camps were ravaged by malaria and dysentery. As soldiers fell ill, mass desertions followed. Without enough men to row, Antony's massive wooden fortresses became dangerously sluggish. Octavian, meanwhile, handed operational control of his forces to this man, Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa. Agrippa was the most gifted military engineer of his era and commanded a veteran, well-drilled fleet immune to the sickness plaguing Antony's camps. Agrippa looked at the board and decided against a direct assault. On this map of the Greek coastline, Antony's fleet is anchored inside the Gulf. Agrippa systematically captured the key southern ports, severing supply lines. Then, as these red lines show, Agrippa parked his ships across the narrow strait, completely strangling the Antonian forces. Through the spring and summer, Antony's men starved, and his ships were pinned against the coastline. Antony had lost the strategic war before a single ship rammed another. He was forced into a desperate position. He had to fight his way out to sea, not to win a decisive victory, but simply to escape with Cleopatra's war chest intact. On September 1st, Antony issued a highly unusual order for classical naval warfare. He commanded his crews to load their heavy sails onto the warships. In ancient combat, sails were normally left on the beach to save weight. Bringing them aboard signaled one thing: they were planning to run. The next afternoon, the two fleets met at the mouth of the Gulf. It was a clash of entirely different naval doctrines. Antony brought his lumbering polyremes, floating castles built for head-on boarding. Agrippa fielded a fleet of Liburnians, smaller, highly agile galleys adapted from pirate designs, built specifically for speed and maneuverability. Agrippa refused to lock into a head-on brawl. Instead, his smaller vessels swarmed Antony's heavy ships. We can see exactly how they did it by looking at this heavy bronze naval ram. Agrippa's crews used weapons just like this to dart in, smash the steering columns, and shear away the enemy oars, leaving the massive Antonian ships dead in the water. The waters quickly devolved into a chaotic melee. Antony's marines rained down javelins and arrows from their wooden towers, while Agrippa's crews fired back with torsion artillery and flaming projectiles. Ship-to-ship boarding actions spread across the line, and casualties mounted heavily on both sides. Then, in mid-afternoon, the prevailing winds shifted to the northwest. Seeing her opening, Cleopatra ordered her squadron's sails unfurled. Her 60 Egyptian ships broke straight through a gap in the center of the fighting and fled south toward the open sea. Within minutes, Antony abandoned his flagship, boarded a lighter vessel, and chased after her. The moment his command flag disappeared from the front line, the morale of his remaining fleet instantly collapsed. What started as a fighting withdrawal quickly unraveled into a complete disaster. Without their commander, the Antononian ships lost coordination. By dusk, some 300 of Antony's vessels had surrendered or burned to the waterline. His naval power was entirely wiped out in a single afternoon. The devastation at sea sealed the fate of the land forces. Antony's army, stranded in Greece, without a commander or a supply line, held their position for a week before their general slipped away in the night. The remaining legions simply surrendered to Octavian and were absorbed into his ranks. The final act played out here, in the harbor of Alexandria. Octavian pursued his rivals to Egypt the following summer. With his armies evaporating around him, Antony fell on his own sword. Refusing to be taken as a captive to Rome, Cleopatra took her own life 11 days later. Octavian systematically tied up the remaining loose ends. He tracked down and executed Caesarion, eliminating his only rival for the title of Caesar's heir. He then annexed Egypt entirely, claiming the territory as his own personal possession. The Ptolemaic dynasty, which had ruled Egypt for nearly 300 years, was finished. The massive agricultural wealth and grain reserves of the last independent Hellenistic kingdom now belonged to Rome, ensuring Octavian had the limitless resources needed to permanently consolidate his power. In 29 BCE, Octavian returned to a Roman public that was physically and financially exhausted by a century of internal conflict. They were ready to pay almost any political price in exchange for stability. 2 years later, Octavian staged a brilliant piece of political theater. He stood before the Senate and formally surrendered all of his emergency powers. In return, the Senate immediately handed them back, along with the title you see immortalized in statues like this one, Augustus, the revered one. He established a system known as the Principate. Augustus maintained the outward aesthetic of the old republic, keeping the Senate, the consuls, and the elections, while privately holding absolute, unchecked monarchical authority. The Roman Republic was dead, and the Roman Empire had arrived. For the next 15 centuries, every emperor who sat on the throne would wield powers that were secured on a single afternoon, off a forgotten Greek promontory, where a fleet of fast ships broke the line at